My name is Dalia Carrian. I'm 36 years old, a federal judge. And the day my parents finally learned what I really do for a living was the day I sentenced my older sister to prison. That morning, courtroom 5C in Raleigh, North Carolina, smelled like floor polish and burned coffee. The ceiling soared high enough to make you feel small, even if you were the one in charge. Every cough, every shuffle bounced off the wood, paneled walls. I wasn't in a robe. Not yet. I sat in the back row, anonymous in a plain charcoal suit, hair pulled back. No jewelry except the ID badge hidden under my blazer. I looked like any mid-level attorney or maybe a nervous paralegal. Which, conveniently, is exactly what my family believed I was. Up front, in the first row behind the defense table, sat my parents. My mother's posture was perfect, chin high, fingers wrapped around a pearl necklace she only wore for important things. My father leaned in close as he whispered to her, both of them focused entirely on the woman at the defense table. My sister, Lena. To the cameras, she was a visionary health tech founder. To my parents, she was the sun, the moon, and the reason they walked into this courthouse, absolutely certain the universe would rearrange itself around her again. "She'll walk," my mother murmured, loud enough for me to hear even across the aisle. "Lena always lands on her feet. This is just politics." My father nodded like a man agreeing with gravity. "They're making an example. Her attorneys will fix it." Not once did their eyes drift to the back row. They had no idea I was even in the room. The prosecution began its opening like a slow knife. Projected emails, falsified clinical trial data, forged patient signatures, Medicare fraud, conspiracy to defraud investors. The kind of case that doesn't just fail a company, it poisons lives. To the untrained eye, Lena looked composed. Designer suit, hair smooth, makeup flawless. To my eye, the one trained to watch micro-expressions all day, I saw the tremor in her thumb when the first spreadsheet went up on the screen. The way her jaw flexed when the prosecutor said the words, knowingly and intentionally. But my parents. My mother whispered, "Look how steady she is. Such poise." My father answered, "They can't touch her. She's too smart for them." They were more worried about their reputation than the reality. So nothing new. The trial rolled on. Then, about an hour in, everything shifted. The lead prosecutor introduced a new set of exhibits. Encrypted emails routed through servers in 3 different states, wire transfers jumping from North Carolina to New York to Nevada, kickbacks labeled as consulting fees, moving across state lines. Federal territory. Judge Harlan, a seasoned state judge with a kind face and tired eyes, paused. The room could feel it. He called both legal teams to the bench, covered his microphone, and spoke in low, tense tones. I didn't have to hear the words. I already knew them. I'd read versions of this case months ago, in sealed memos under fluorescent lights in Washington. Jurisdiction. Federal statutes. Cross, state healthcare fraud. The quiet conversation ended. Judge Harlan straightened, removed his glasses, and cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice heavier now. "Given the evidence introduced this morning, this matter implicates federal healthcare and wire fraud statutes. This court's authority is limited. Under pre-arranged protocol with the Federal Circuit, I am transferring jurisdiction, effective immediately." There was a murmur in the gallery. Reporters glanced at each other. My parents stiffened. Judge Harlan looked toward the back of the room. "Right at me? Judge Carrian?" he said, each syllable echoing, "Would you please take the bench?" Silence slammed into the courtroom. I stood. My mother turned, casual at first, then fully. Neck craning, eyes searching. My father followed her stare. For a second, they didn't recognize me. Then they did. My father's mouth opened like someone had cut a wire inside him. My mother's fingers loosened on her pearls. They clinked softly against each other. Lena whipped around. The color drained from her face so fast it almost made me dizzy to watch. I stepped out of the shadow of the back row and walked down the center aisle. Every tap of my heels sounded impossibly loud. I didn't look left or right. I'd spent my entire childhood trying to be seen by these two people. Now the entire room was watching. "Will the court please rise?" The bailiff called, voice steady. Everyone stood. Everyone, including my parents. I stepped up, moved behind the bench, and slid into the high, back chair that always feels about 2 inches too big for any human. A clerk approached, handing me the updated file, a thicker, heavier version of the case I'd been following in silence for months. I adjusted the microphone. "This court is now in federal session," I said, Judge Dalia Carrian presiding. "Let the record reflect the transfer of jurisdiction and continuation of proceedings under Title 18 of the United States Code. If you've ever been the invisible one in your family, the one forgotten in photos, the one whose achievements got treated like background noise, that moment was for you. Because before I ever sat on that bench, I learned exactly what it feels like to disappear in plain sight. I was 12 the first time I understood I was invisible. It was late spring in Charlotte, North Carolina. The azaleas were blooming, the pollen was assaulting my allergies, and our backyard was transformed into a fairy tale stage for Lena's Future of America party. She had just been named a state finalist in some national STEM competition. There were banners with her name. Strings of lights zigzagged over rented white tables. A catering van blocked half the driveway. They hired a photographer. A week earlier, I had stood on a different stage, in a small middle school auditorium that smelled like chalk and gym socks, and won first place in a regional debate tournament. I held the cheap little plaque all the way home, like it was made of glass. That night, I printed my certificate on the wheezing family printer and taped it to the fridge. Right at eye level, for once, my name was in the middle of the house. The next morning, it was gone. In its place, taped in the same spot, was a glossy invitation celebrating Dalia Carrian, innovator, leader, future engineer. I found my certificate folded in half in the mail basket under a stack of grocery coupons. "Mom?" I held it up. "What happened to my—" She didn't look away from her phone. "Oh, sweetheart, I moved it. We don't want to clutter the fridge before the party. You know how people crowd around for drinks. It's not clutter. I won." She gave me a thin smile, already half distracted. "And that's very nice, Dalia, but Lena's achievement is at a different level. Statewide, sweetheart. Let's not confuse the spotlight, okay? Confuse the spotlight. That's what I was, I realized. Static, interference. Something to be moved aside so the real show could go on. At dinner, I tried again. My teacher said my closing argument sounded like something from a real trial. My dad laughed, good-natured but sharp enough. "What, you cross-examined a bunch of 7th graders about cafeteria pizza?" Lena snorted. "Relax, Perry Mason." They all laughed. I stopped talking. High school made it worse. Lena became a local legend. Robotics championships, a summer at MIT's pre-engineering program, a science fair project that got her name in the city paper. My accomplishments were quieter. Honor roll, mock trial captain, state debate titles. Wins that happened in classrooms and courthouse basements, not under bright gymnasium lights. Our parents came to every one of Lena's events, armed with cameras. They never came to a single one of mine. My refuge was room 108, at the far end of a scuffed hallway that always smelled vaguely of whiteboard cleaner. AP Government, Mr. Klein. Where other teachers saw quiet, and he saw something else. "You don't miss details, do you?" he said one afternoon as I stayed behind, erasing the last lines of a case summary I'd written on the board. "You listen before you speak. That's rare, Carrian. Rare and dangerous for anyone who tries to underestimate you." He pressed a battered paperback into my hands. A book about a forgotten Supreme Court case, not a thriller, not a novel. Just pages and pages of one man's fight to be heard. "Read this," he said. "I think you'll understand why the quiet ones changed the rules." I devoured it in 2 nights. From then on, my dreams didn't look like Lena's. No labs, no TED stages, just a courtroom, a bench, and a strange, fierce sense that if I could make it there, I could never be erased again. College was my escape route. I got a full scholarship to UNC. No one cried when they dropped me off. My mother checked her watch 3 times. My father reminded me to stay practical and maybe look into paralegal certificates, in case that whole law thing didn't work out. Lena had already left for Stanford. At her send-off party, there were custom cookies and a champagne toast. At mine, My dad honked twice from the car and said he didn't want to hit game day traffic. I stopped going home for Thanksgiving. I didn't tell them when I got into Yale Law. I didn't send a screenshot when the email came with the words, "We are pleased to offer you admission." I printed it, folded it into the back of my notebook, and went on with my day. My roommate Tasha found me surrounded by casebooks that night. "Why do you look like someone died?" she asked. I handed her the letter. Her eyes widened. "You're kidding me. Dalia, this is huge. You're incredible." "Don't be dramatic," I muttered, out of habit. She shook her head. "You realize most people would throw a full-on party for this, right?" "Who would I invite?" I asked. She didn't have an answer, but she stayed. And for the first time, my success wasn't a threat to someone else's spotlight. Law school was brutal and beautiful. I clerked. I interned. I devoured statutes while other people slept. After graduation, I moved through positions I'd once only read about: federal clerkships, then a slot at the Department of Justice, then a judicial appointment to a specialized federal court focused on complex financial and healthcare fraud. 34. Young, yes, not impossible. My court didn't give interviews. Photos of me were rare. That suited me perfectly. Back home, my parents still told anyone who asked that I helped with legal paperwork somewhere out west. Once, in a holiday group text, I saw the phrase, "Dalia does filing stuff for attorneys." I let it slide. What was I going to do? Argue them into being proud? Lena, meanwhile, became a headline. She launched a startup promising to revolutionize patient data with an app that claimed to predict treatment outcomes using AI. Investors poured money into it. Magazines put her in glossy spreads. The doctor of data, one profile called her. Our parents framed the article and hung it in the living room. I found out about it when Tasha texted me a photo. "Your sister's on my news feed again. Still allergic to mentioning you, I see." 6 months later, my phone rang. Lena, her name on my screen felt like a prank. I stared at it, thumb hovering over decline. Then, out of some barely alive sense of curiosity, or masochism, I answered. "Dalia!" she sang, like we'd spoken last week. "Wow, long time. How's the document thing?" "Document thing." I was sitting at my desk reviewing a sealed brief in a multi-state fraud investigation. "It's fine," I said. Listen to how small my voice went. "I need a tiny favor," Lena continued. "My legal team is swamped, and there are just a few contracts I'd love you to look over." "You're good with that boring detail stuff, right?" "Just between us?" I didn't correct her. I didn't say, "I sign orders that move millions of dollars and decide who goes to prison." I didn't say, "You are talking to a federal judge." I just said, "Send them." The files dropped into my inbox an hour later. They were a mess. Clauses that contradicted each other. Vague language that would invite lawsuits. Funding obligations that broke 3 different federal regulations. And something else. Side letters that hinted at numbers not matching the public claims. I spent 3 weekends on them. Nights, early mornings, read, penning like my life depended on it. I didn't tell my clerks. I didn't log the hours. I wasn't supposed to be doing it at all. I sent Lena a 15-page memo. She replied with one-line thanks. "You're a lifesaver." No call. "No, this is brilliant. Just thanks." A month later, a video of her investor presentation went semi-viral. Lena on stage, perfectly lit, smiling just enough. At the last minute, she said, "My intuition told me some of our contracts weren't structured right. So I dove in and reworked the framework myself. You have to trust your gut in this game." But the crowd laughed, applauded. I closed the laptop. All I felt was a hard, clean coldness, like standing in a walk-in freezer. It wasn't about credit. It was about recognition that I existed. Apparently, I still didn't. The next day, my father forwarded me an article about Lena closing another funding round. Subject line: "Look at what your sister's doing."
No, how are you?
No, where are you these days? Just another digital shrine to their golden daughter. I didn't reply. 6 months later, Lena's company crossed my desk again, not as an email from my sister, as a file stamped confidential in red ink. There were whistleblower complaints, discrepancies between reported clinical results and hospital records. Allegations that her company had altered trial data to get their app approved for use in major hospital systems. Medicare was paying for treatments recommended by an algorithm built on lies. This time, I didn't touch the details. I recused myself immediately, filed the formal motion, declared the conflict. A week later, my chief judge called. "We're honoring the recusal," she said. "You're off the primary assignment. But because you know the underlying statutes better than anyone, we're listing you as a standby for jurisdictional issues. Advisory only, you won't preside. Unless there's a failure of the initial forum." "Understood," I answered. I told myself the odds were slim. Most cases stayed where they started. The state attorney general brought charges in North Carolina. There was a perfectly competent judge assigned. I watched from a distance, reading publicly available updates like any stranger, until that morning in Raleigh. Until the jurisdictional lines blurred. Until Judge Harlan's tired eyes found mine across a buzzing courtroom. Until my name, my full name, echoed through a room where my parents were sitting. From the bench, the world looks different. Faces blur at the edges. You see posture, not people. Patterns, not individuals. But not that day. That day, behind the prosecution's exhibits and the defense's polished outrage, behind rows of reporters and curious onlookers, I saw three faces in sharp, painful clarity. My mother, my father, my sister. The attorneys scrambled to adjust to the new reality. Federal rules, different evidentiary standards. I ruled on objections with practiced ease, clear, neutral, unshakable. Halfway through the afternoon, during a short recess, I stepped into the side corridor behind the courtroom. The hallway was cool, the hum of fluorescent lights loud in the temporary silence. I heard the footsteps before I saw her. "Dalia," Lena hissed. She rounded the corner, eyes wild, as if she'd been dropped into some surreal nightmare. "You can't do this," she snapped. "Tell him you can't do this. You're my sister." I met her gaze. For the first time in our lives, I was literally above her. In authority, in power, in the one place I had always imagined myself. "I'm not doing anything to you," I said quietly. "The evidence is." She took a step closer. "You could recuse yourself." "I already did," I said. "I'm here because another judge failed jurisdiction. I didn't ask for this, Lena." She laughed bitterly. "Sure, you must be loving this. Finally in the spotlight, right? Finally the important one." The old part of me, 12, standing at that fridge, flinched. The woman I had built since then did not. "This isn't about me," I said. "And it stopped being about you the moment you doctored patient data to make your product look better. You put people at risk. This is about them." Behind her, my mother appeared, breathless, mascara slightly smudged. "Dalia, please," she said, voice fragile in a way I'd never heard. "You don't understand what this will do to our family." There it was. Family. Not the patients who'd been prescribed treatments based on false information. Not the hospitals on the hook for fraudulent charges. Not the investors who'd been lied to. Our family. "You never asked what anything did to me," I answered, keeping my tone even. Years of training wrapped around that sentence like armor. "You never asked what it meant when I moved across the country. When I stopped coming home, when I disappeared from your stories, unless I was walking behind Lena in a photograph." My mother's mouth opened, then closed. My father stood a few steps back, hands in his pockets, shoulders stiff. For once, he said nothing. The bailiff rounded the corner. "Judge," he said, nodding. "We're back in 5. I stepped around them. "Return to your seats," I said. Not as a daughter, but as a judge. "We're still in session." The trial moved faster after the transfer. Federal prosecutors don't bring a case like that unless it's airtight. Witness after witness, data analysts, former employees, doctors who had trusted Lena's app, one nurse who cried on the stand describing a patient who'd skipped a necessary in-person exam because the app said their risk was low. The defense tried to spin it as ambitious mistakes and growing pains of innovation. The jury didn't buy it. On the third day of deliberation, the clerk buzzed my chambers. "They have a verdict, Judge." I put on my robe. It's heavier than people think. Thick. Hot under the lights. In the courtroom, the air felt carved out of stone. I'll rise. Everyone stood. Be seated. The foreperson, a middle-aged woman in scrubs, held the verdict forms like they weighed more than her. In the case of the United States versus Dalia Carrian, she read, voice trembling slightly. On the charge of healthcare fraud, we find the defendant guilty. My mother made a sound like someone had knocked the breath from her. Lena stared straight ahead. On the charge of wire fraud, guilty. My father's jaw clenched. On the charge of conspiracy to defraud investors and federal programs, guilty. Lena finally turned her head and looked up at me. Not with rage. Not with tears. With something worse? A kind of hollow disbelief, as if the world she'd known, the one where rules bent for her, where someone always fixed it, where being special meant never really facing the consequences, had evaporated right there under fluorescent lights. I had seen that look before. On men in suits. On CEOs. On politicians. On people who thought consequences were problems other people had. I had never imagined I'd see it on my sister's face. Sentencing guidelines in federal court are not vibes, they are math. Years calculated from tables based on losses, victims, intent. I read them aloud. This court sentences you, Miss Carrian, to a term of 84 months in federal custody, I said. Restitution as outlined in the judgment. You will be remanded immediately. My voice didn't crack. I didn't look at my parents. This court is adjourned. The gavel hit wood. Reporters exploded into motion. Cameras flashed. I walked out. Not fast, not slow, just steady. Back in chambers, I closed the door and let the quiet crash down. For the first time since my name had been called, I sat alone with the reality of what had just happened. My phone buzzed. Voicemail from Mom. Dalia. We didn't know. Her voice stammered through the speaker. We never realized. We're so sorry. Please call us. Please. I deleted it before she finished. Not out of spite. Out of self-preservation. They'd had 36 years to see me. To ask what I was building. To learn my actual job title. They waited until I was the only person in the room they couldn't ignore. People assumed that trial would change me. That I'd do book tours, Netflix interviews, church, basement speaking engagements about ethics and family. I did none of it. I declined every media request. I released a single, dry statement that said nothing beyond the court record. I went back to my docket. But something had shifted. Not out there. In here. For most of my life, I'd chased one kind of validation. The kind that sounded like, we're proud of you. From two people who, deep down, were never going to say it without attaching Lena's name to it somehow. The day I hit delete on my mother's voicemail, I stopped waiting. Instead, I started building something I wish I'd had when I was 12, staring at a blank spot on the fridge. It began with one law student. Her name was Nia. 3rd year. Brilliant, so soft-spoken that professors routinely skipped over her raised hand for louder classmates. She interned in my chambers one summer. After watching her get talked over in a meeting 2 days in a row, I called her in. You know the case law better than anyone in that room, I said. Why did you let them shut you down? She looked at the floor. I'm not like them. I don't command attention. I thought about white tents in our backyard and banners with Lena's name. Good, I said. Attention is overrated. Command respect instead. That's harder to take away. She blinked. How? Precision, I said. Preparation, calm. The person who knows the record best controls the room, whether they shout or whisper. We spent Friday evenings going over her arguments. I interrupted her. Talked over her on purpose. Taught her how to get the floor back without raising her volume. By the end of the clerkship, her voice hadn't gotten louder. It had gotten sharper. Word spread. First it was 1 more student, then 3, then 7. Women and a few men, all of them. Too quiet, too intense, not leadery enough, according to the world around them. I carved out time twice a month. No selfies, no social media, no LinkedIn posts about giving back. We just worked. On arguments, on presence, on turning every "you're too much" and "you're not enough" into white noise and letting the record speak louder than any of it. Lena went to a minimum security facility in West Virginia. I read routine updates the way other people read weather alerts. Facility status stable. Inmate Carrian enrolled in accounting class. I didn't feel triumph. Just distance. A boat I'd already watched drift beyond the horizon. My parents sent a letter, a holiday card, another voicemail. I didn't respond. Some gaps aren't wounds anymore. They're boundaries. 1 year after the verdict, on a gray Friday afternoon when most of the building had already emptied for the weekend, I walked past courtroom 5C. I paused outside the door. Inside, the lights were off. Rows of benches sat in dim quiet, the judge's chair an empty silhouette against faint window light. I stood there, hand on the cool brass handle, when a small voice spoke behind me. "Excuse me, Judge Carrian." I turned. A girl, 15, maybe 16, stood there in a school blazer 2 sizes too big. A teacher waited a respectful distance away. She glanced at the plaque beside the door. At my name. You're the judge from that big healthcare case, right?" she asked, cheeks flushing as if she wasn't sure she should bring it up. "Yes," I said. She swallowed. "My government teacher showed us a clip, the part where you overruled that attorney when he tried to talk over the prosecutor. I've watched it so many times." I smiled, just a little. I didn't realize that made the highlight reel. She shifted her backpack. I want to be a judge someday. Or a lawyer. Something like that. But people tell me I'm too quiet. That I don't have the personality for it. There it was again. Too quiet. "Let them talk," I said. She frowned, confused. "Let them think you're harmless," I continued. "Then do the work anyway. Learn the rules better than anyone in the room. When you finally speak, make sure what you say is so precise they have to listen. That's how you win in here." Her eyes lit up like I'd handed her a password instead of advice. "Thank you," she whispered. She walked away, back to her group, already chattering to her teacher. I looked at the plaque with my name on it. Years ago, I would have thought that moment was about being seen. It wasn't. It was about her knowing that someone like her, quiet, overlooked, told to tone it down, or speak up, or be anything other than exactly who she was, could walk into the highest room in the building and have it rise for her. There are no parades for women like me. No viral montages. No statues. Just the sound of a gavel. The rustle of people standing when you enter. The knowledge that you did the work, even when no one clapped for you. They used to talk over me, forget me, step past me as if I were part of the furniture. Now, when I speak in my courtroom, everyone rises.